Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back. In today's video, we are going to be creating a shaker card, but this one here, we're going to create a shaker element that kind of is continuous throughout the entire scene. So rather than create a shaker element that is kind of a standalone focal point, we're going to incorporate it into our underwater ocean scene so that we have part of it interactive with the shaker element and then the rest of it is just going to be a regular scene on the card. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create the background that's going to form our scene. So I want to have some sand and I also want to have some water since we're going to create kind of an underwater scene and I want it to look like we're at the beach or in the ocean. So what I'm going to do is I have the Drifts and Hills stencil there and I've put it onto my piece of watercolor cardstock. And I'm just taking some Mermaid Lagoon Distress ink and I'm going to add this to the panel. I apologize, I did go out of focus a little bit there as I was moving the ink blending tool. But I'm just doing some basic ink blending and I'm going to switch out the colors as I work my way up so that I have a darker color on the bottom and it kind of goes lighter as I make my way to the top. I like creating this ombre effect when I'm creating an ocean scene because I think it really adds to the overall look because it makes it look like there's kind of some sun at the top area where the surface of the water would be, and then it gets a little bit darker as it makes its way down. So I have Peacock Feathers and Tumble Glass Distress ink in addition to the Mermaid Lagoon. And I'm just blending all of those together until I get a nice even blend and don't have any harsh lines there. And you can see it has a lot of texture, and that's because we're working on the textured side of the watercolor paper. And I really like that. I wanted to have that texture just to add to the realism of the water. So now that I have the water completed, I need to add the color that I'm going to be using for my sand. So I have Tea Dye Distress ink, and I'm just using the ink blending tool once again. And I'm just going to apply this to the bottom area where I don't have any color yet. Now, I'm not going to put the stencil back into place because when I add this brown ink, I'm going to kind of go up into the blue a little bit. And that's just because I want it to look like the sand is continuous into the water and I don't want them to look like two completely separate things. This just kind of helps to blend everything together and makes it actually look like there's sand at the bottom of that water. And for the sand, I did do the same thing as I did with the water, but just with one color. I stayed a little bit darker at the bottom and then lightened it up as I made my way towards the water. Now for the sand, I also wanted to add a little bit more texture and dimension to this. I want it to look a lot more realistic. To me right now, even though we have that great color blend, it still looks kind of flat. So I'm using the Drifts and Hills stencil and my ink blending tool, and I'm adding a few spots of really dark color to kind of make it look like there's hills within that large hill that we created. I just thought that it added a little bit more texture by doing that. And then once I did that, I decided I also needed to do something in the water, so I'm using the wave stencil and I'm adding a little bit of wave detail to the background. Now I'm keeping this pretty straightforward. I'm going straight up the entire panel, and I just like the look of having that in the background. I just think it adds a little bit more to it and just makes it look a little bit more dimensional. Okay, so now if you know me, you know I'm going to probably add water to this distress ink. So I just have my distress sprayer here and I'm adding some water to my hand and I'm just flicking that onto the panel and then I'm dabbing that up with a paper towel. And this is going to react with that distress ink and give us those little white splotches. And I love doing this with water especially because it almost looks like air bubbles and we're going to add fish to the scene. So it's just going to really help to add to the overall look that we're going for. So now I have the Aquarium Die-namics and we're not going to actually create an aquarium with this one. We're going to cut an opening into our scene and this is where we're going to create the shaker element. Now there is coordinating shaker pouches that go with the aquarium die, so that's why I wanted to use this die specifically so that I could quickly and easily create that shaker portion. I moved the die around the card panel just to figure out exactly where I wanted to position it, and once I had it where I liked it, I just ran it through my die cutting machine, and now you can see that we have two parts. We have that backer piece that we're going to put back into the opening when we assemble the shaker, and then we have the outside piece here. Now for this piece, it is measuring right now 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, which is the size of our finished card, and I want this to be slightly smaller than the card base so that we can see the border of the card base peeking around the edges. So I am trimming this down 1/4 inch just to make it fit nicely onto that card base. So now that I have the inking and die cutting finished, I can go ahead and start to assemble the parts of the scene. So I have a piece of white cardstock that is cut slightly smaller than our inked up panel, and this is just going to be what I'm using to kind of adhere everything down on. Once we have everything completely together, we'll put this entire panel onto our card base. So the first thing I'm going to do is adhere the inside area of the shaker portion onto this panel. So I have the outer portion kind of held in place there just so I know where to adhere the inside piece, and then I just put that down with regular adhesive. And now you can see I have that shaker pouch and it's going to fit into this opening and we're going to easily be able to layer this on top once we have everything ready to go. So the first thing I want to do is I want to adhere the shaker pouch into the opening on this panel. My favorite way to do this is with Scor-Tape because it's a really nice strong adhesive, and I am no good with liquid glue when it comes to shaker pouches. I usually end up getting it all over my shaker pouch, and I just prefer not to have the mess. So I find it so much quicker and easier for me to use the Scor-Tape. I usually use the 1/8 inch just because it's really nice and thin and it fits nicely on the outer lip of the shaker pouch. So I have the adhesive on the back of that panel, so it's ready to go. But now I'm going to kind of put the shaker part on hold so that we can start to assemble our scene. So I used some various stamp sets and I did my stamping, coloring, and die cutting off camera just to save a little bit of time. And I have a little assortment of a crab, some fish, and some greenery that we can add to our scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of take all of the pieces and I'm going to start to position them onto the card, just so I can figure out where I want them to go on the finished card. I usually prefer to do this before I adhere anything down. Just in case I'm not happy with the overall placement, I can quickly move things before I am actually committing to putting them on the card. When I was coloring the images, I went with colors that will kind of stand out against the background, so I didn't use any blues or aquas or browns in any of my coloring. I kind of went with some bright pinks and purples and even a little rainbow fish there, and then the bright red colors for my crab. So I'm just kind of finishing placing everything, and you can see here I have that yellow fish kind of overlapping, and that is on purpose. I want this guy to be half in the shaker and half out of the shaker. I just thought it would really help to show that the scene is continuous by having one of the components kind of half in and half out. So what I did is I kind of cut it in half with my scissors there, and then I just adhered it right down onto that inner piece. And now I'm adding the rest of these pieces here that are going to be inside the shaker. To adhere these guys down, I'm using liquid adhesive here and just putting it right onto the die cut and putting that into place. I want them to be completely flat since this is going to be a shaker, and I don't want any of the shaker elements to kind of get stuck on the die cut pieces. So I'm just adding my last little plant there, and then I'm putting the scene back over top, and I'm going to position the end of that fish onto the outer portion. I needed to have this in place to do that, to make sure that I had it lined up perfectly and everything is going to look right, and the fish is actually going to look like he goes together. So once I had him on there, I just went ahead and continued to add the rest of these little elements here. I'm going to add everything on here except for the crab, and that's because he's going to kind of overlap the shaker element, so he's going to have a little bit of dimension, so he's going to need some foam adhesive. So we'll leave him and we'll start to assemble the shaker now. So I'm removing all of the Scor-Tape first, and we need to adhere the shaker pouch into the opening, so I'm just going to kind of put that in there, and the little lip on the side of that shaker pouch is going to adhere perfectly onto the Scor-Tape. So now I'm going to put my little shaker elements onto the scene before I adhere everything together. So I'm using some clear droplets from Studio Katcha just to kind of look like bubbles in the water, and I'm going to sprinkle some of those onto the scene. Now I would normally put my shaker pieces inside of the shaker pouch first and then add the backer sheet on top, but since we need to be able to line up the two pieces of our scene, I'm adding them onto the scene first, and then we'll bring this top panel directly over top of that. Okay, so now completing the card is pretty quick and easy. You just need to add Scor-Tape to the back of the front panel and then position it right over top of that little scene and kind of press down really well to make sure you have it fully adhered. And now you can see that we have this continuous scene that we created, but we have that fun interactive shaker element that's kind of added to the scene. So the last thing we need to do now is add our little crab character. So for him, I'm going to add adhesive to the right-hand side since he's going to overlap the shaker pouch. And on the left-hand side, I added a little bit of foam adhesive, and that's going to make it so that he's the same height as the shaker pouch, and we can just add him right on there. So he kind of looks like he's sitting in the sand. And then we can add this finished panel to our card base. So since we had cut it down earlier, we can now see a little bit of that Limelight card base kind of peeking around all four edges. And the last thing we need to do is add a sentiment. So I kind of looked at this for a few minutes and I really wasn't sure where I was going to put it. I kind of didn't even think about it when I was making the scene, and now I don't really have anywhere for it to go. I didn't want to stamp directly on the water and risk kind of messing it up after all of this work. So what I ended up doing was I added the sentiment to a sentiment banner, and I ended up putting it on the inside of the card. So once I had figured out that that's what I was going to do, I decided to fill up a bunch of the space in the water with some more of those clear droplets to make it look like I had some dimensional bubbles with the fish. And then I stamped my Your Fantastic sentiment onto a white banner that I die cut from the Hearts in a Row Horizontal Die-namics, and I'm just adhering that onto the inside area of the card and trimming it down so that it fits. Sometimes I really like the look of a card that doesn't include a sentiment on the front, just because it really helps to leave the scene as the focal and it doesn't take away from all of the great images, and in this case, that cool interactive shaker portion that we added. So that is it. That completes our fun continuous shaker scene card. I hope you enjoyed today's video and got some ideas for ways to use our shaker pouches with your scenes. Thanks so much for joining me, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Thanks for watching.